Hi, everybody. I'm Nikki Renslow, Senior Program Director here at Family Source Consultants, and I am joined by Adriana Caro. Adriana is a licensed professional counselor with extensive experience supporting surrogates, intended parents, and third-party reproduction professionals. Today, we're going to talk about the emotional and interpersonal dynamics of the surrogacy journey and best practices for fostering healthy, respectful, and lasting relationships between all parties. Hi, Adriana.
Hi, Nikki. Thank you so much for having me.
You are so welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Okay, so Adriana, can you start by sharing a bit about your background and your work in the surrogacy and mental health space?
Sure. I have been in the mental health field for 23 years. I've worked in a variety of mental health settings, inpatient, outpatient, community health settings, as well as private practice, and most recently in surrogacy. I went through my own reproductive medical journey 13 years ago. So, in addition to my professional experience working with people and their life stories, I can truly relate to having gone through my own infertility journey. And I know how important it is to have a mental health baseline in the reproductive medicine world.
Absolutely. I love that and that you have that personal connection, right? From your experience, why are strong relationships, excuse me, so critical in a surrogacy journey?
Well, if we look at strong relationships and what
Mhm.
they're founded in trust and communication. Our earliest experiences as babies are founded in trust that another adult is going to, our caregivers are going to be present, they're going to meet our needs. And the same strong relationships are needed in your in your reproductive doctor, in your clinic, with your IPs, with your GCs. Strong relationships are built on trust, transparency, predictability, and communication.
Oh, yeah, there's definitely a lot that goes into this journey. So I definitely
Absolutely.
understand that. And that's why I definitely want to touch on communication and connection, right? So even though all journeys, intended parents, surrogates, egg donors may have different opinions when it comes to this, I love chatting through this, right? Especially from the mental health perspective. So
Yes.
going into this, yeah, like what would you say are some of the most common communication challenges you would see between surrogates and intended parents?
Yeah, I would say some of the most common communication challenges I've seen are not being transparent for fear of saying the wrong thing. So most of our surrogates will say that they're excited to include their intended parents with the little nuances of the pregnancy journey. While I had one intended parent say to me, "Well, we don't want to intrude on the surrogate's life. We'll just be, sitting back a little bit, and we don't want to bother her. She's already doing such an amazing thing for us." But once I clarified that most surrogates prefer an involved intended parent, the intended parents are able to understand that being involved wasn't an imposition, but rather welcomed. So I would say the old adage, say what you mean and mean what you say. Open communication is key.
Oh, I like that, right? And there are still, I like to piggyback on this, especially working closely with matching and intake, that there may be some intended parents or surrogates who are comfortable with that communication, fading away after delivery. And that's why working with an agency and matching is so important, right? Taking that communication piece into consideration for both surrogates and intended parents and, and donors as well. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Let me ask you, how early should the surrogate and intended parents begin working on building a strong relationship? And in practice, what does that look like?
Yeah, surrogates and intended parents can work on building a strong relationship as early as that first match meeting. So prior to the match meeting, profiles have been shared, and it gives a glimpse for both the intended parents and the gestational surrogates on their preferences and their responses and their profiles. And so both sides already have some idea of who they are going to meet with. Match meetings can be nerve-wracking. Our match specialists are amazing at facilitating the meetings, ensuring everyone's comfort level, and guiding the conversations to address all major points, as well as field any questions that either side may have. And this is a great opportunity to come with a few of your own questions so you can leave the meeting feeling as though you were able to get a good read on your intended parents or your gestational carrier. And in practice, it looks like honoring your agreement, your agreed upon commitments. So the frequency of communication, giving and receiving updates during the pregnancy, warmly receiving the other side. It's that golden rule, treat others how you would want to be treated.
Yes, I love this. And, you know, throughout the journey, everybody's handheld from start to finish, right? And so you also have the professionals, right, who've been doing this for a long time. Well, a lot of, you know, people at the agency have gone through their own surrogacy journeys or have been egg donors, intended parents, or who have gone through IVF, right, and can really help with that communication, you know, if any of those parties are struggling. So I
Mhm.
love the fact that they also get to meet with you, right, and you still have this conversation as well. And I think after the match meeting, it's like everyone can breathe.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So, with that, what role would you say that the agency plays in helping facilitate healthy communication and connection?
I like to say that Family Source Consultants is a very well-oiled machine. Each
Mm.
step of the journey is explained thoroughly with an explanation of the next steps and a warm handoff via email from one team member that you're working with to the next team member you'll be working with. And this framework is set up so that you can anticipate what's coming next, whether this is in conversation with the contact person at Family Source or an email letting you know what the next steps are. While at times this can kind of feel repetitive to either the gestational carrier or the intended parents, we prefer to think of the repetition as being thorough and communicative and checking in to ensure your comfort level at each stage. We sincerely hope this helps build a trusting relationship that is built on communication and connection.
Yeah, yeah, we're a large team. So there's a lot of us that go into these journeys, right? And we're all here every step of the way. And even though you may be moving forward in your journey, which is a good thing, right? So you're introduced to another person, we're all
Mhm.
here in the backgrounds, like cheerleading you on. So I love
Absolutely.
that. Thank you for elaborating on that.
Mhm.
Elaborating, excuse me. You know, so with that, I love the setting expectations and boundaries, right? You know, that's one thing that's done in the beginning of the journey all the way through the end after delivery. So, with that, what are some effective ways that surrogates and intended parents can set those healthy boundaries while still maintaining that close and supportive relationship?
Yeah, I would say that setting healthy boundaries is kind of like an art. You know, you want to make sure that you are setting expectations for how you want to be treated and the journey, the surrogacy journey. And IPs and surrogates can set up healthy boundaries by first identifying what a surrogacy journey looks like to each party
Okay.
individually. For many people, a surrogacy journey is their first one. So while Family Source will help you at each stage, each step of the surrogacy journey, it's important to understand your role in the surrogacy journey, either as an intended parent or a gestational carrier. And boundaries may include identifying the frequency and method of communication that works. It's important to establish parameters so that each side knows what to expect and what is expected of them. And this helps ensure everyone's comfort level in the journey as we're all getting to know each other. Both sides are getting to know each other so that the partnership can be a successful one.
Yes, and that's talked about too in the beginning when surrogates, egg donors, intended parents, everybody on boards. What kind of communication do you want? What kind of communication do you prefer? How do you like that? Whether it's
Hmm.
WhatsApp, Messenger, email, phone, text, right? And it's
Yeah.
also discussed in that match meeting. And that's one thing that will be brought up throughout your journey. So thank you so much for covering that. How would you say, how can both parties navigate different expectations around things like medical decisions, contact frequency, or in all reality, even something like a birth plan?
Yeah, absolutely. Medical decisions, contact frequency, and birth plans are just three of the topics that we
Mhm.
discuss in the match meeting. Prior to your match meeting, the intended parents and the gestational carriers will have filled out their profile in what their preferences are, and we're asked. In addition, both sides will have mental health evaluations and the mental health provider will have asked both sides privately for their preferences. And then we discuss these preferences together as a group during the match meeting. It's important to discuss difficult and uncomfortable questions transparently so that we ensure a good match. And we cover these difficult questions early on to remove any of the guesswork that might come along in the journey.
Love this. And you sure do. What are red flags, right, that might suggest a relationship needs extra support or guidance? Maybe some examples of those.
Yeah, some red flags might suggest a relationship needs extra support if the intended parents or surrogates, like if the trust is lacking between them, if either party aren't communicating openly and transparently. In general, we trust those we love and whom we have known a long time. And with a surrogacy journey, we're asking both intended parents and surrogates to kind of blindly trust. We always say to our intended parents and surrogates to trust the process, right? We say this phrase all the time,
Yep.
which is easy for us to say because this is what we do and we trust our processes. So I would say rely on your agency, rely on us to guide your journey and communicate when you are feeling uncomfortable, uneasy, frustrated, unsure. We're here to answer any questions and reassure any feelings of unease that you may have.
I love that, and we'll get there, right? I like to say it's almost like a garden. The more that you put into it, the more that it's going to grow into this like beautiful organic thing, right? And so
Hmm.
it's tending to that garden, whether it's that emotional support, mental health, right? Or that communication in general. And a
Absolutely.
big part of this journey is emotional support, mental health. So when you look at an entire journey, what kinds of emotional support, excuse me, are most important for surrogates and intended parents throughout the journey, do you think?
Well, one question that is asked during the mental health evaluation and the intended parent mental health consultation is, what does your support system look like? That's a major question, a very important question, and it's so important to have emotional supports in place so that you can express any and all emotions, any feelings of frustration, hopelessness with your trusting, supportive people. This can be your partner, your best friends, your coworkers, your village or tribe. I have a lot of people that say they have a village or a tribe.
Hmm.
This can even be professional support like a therapist or even, kind of as a silent observer in online support groups. Even if you don't comment, even reading along, but not necessarily participating or putting yourself out there can be a great source of support. You can read along with about someone's journey or someone's post online and that feels similar to yours and get validation in how you're feeling. And most importantly, the emotional support needs to be one that works for you. This can look very different from one person to the next. And it's important to know what kind and what level of emotional support you need.
A 1,000% full transparency. When I was a surrogate, my husband was my biggest supporter and he was there through the journey, my first C-section, right? And so it's very important for surrogates and intended parents that you have that support system, that you have that village around you, because
Hmm.
pregnancy in and of itself is hard, right? But for intended parents, you're bringing this baby home. You're, like you said, trusting someone, right, to
Hmm.
carry that child. And for the surrogate, you need that village to help with your own family while you're going through this process. And there are those emotions, right? So we definitely want to make sure that you're okay. And of course, there's always access to mental health resources before, during, after the process. So thank
Hmm.
you so much for covering that.
Yeah.
How would you say both parties manage emotional highs and lows, especially during more vulnerable moments, right? So like medical procedures or delivery.
Yeah, well, in addition to utilizing the support system that we just talked about, we also
Mhm.
ask intended parents and gestational carriers about their self-care. So, what does self-care
Mm.
look like to you? What are your coping mechanisms? What does that entail? So, if anybody is familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's that triangle that talks about your basic needs, basic human needs, food, water, warmth, rest, safety, security, right? But then we all personally have things that we need, whether that's time alone, whether that's support, talking with somebody we love and trust. And so in these vulnerable moments, we have to ask ourselves, what needs need to be met? So if a gestational carrier is undergoing a medical procedure or delivery, who does she want with her during that time? Obviously, we encourage, invitation of the intended parents to be in the delivery room while their child is being born, but we want to also ensure that the gestational carrier is comfortable in such a important moment, right, where she's allowing this child to come into this world. So, can she have her emotional support or comfort person with her in addition to the intended parents? Does she need to implement coping mechanisms, deep breathing, meditation, anything like that? The same goes for intended parents. They might be feeling anxious or unsettled at some points in the journey. What coping mechanisms can they put into place to get through?
Oh, I love that. I'm gonna have to take a look at this pyramid. That's my first
Hmm.
time I've heard of that.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay, I'm gonna take a look.
yeah. Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Maslow's hierarchy of moods. Okay, well, that's on my to-do list. What, Adriana, is your advice for handling disagreements or misunderstandings during the journey?
Well, there are so many different moving parts in and along this journey between
Okay.
doctors, clinics, agencies, the ASRM guidelines. IPs and GCs have been thrown a lot of new information, and information keeps coming throughout the journey. And there are bound to be maybe a disagreement or misunderstandings in such a complex journey. And I would say first ask for clarification, right? We sometimes want to, accuse or get an email and kind of we're hot, right, to ask our question. But if we could just take a step back, take a deep breath and get a clarifying answer, right? So ask a question first and wait for the response so that you make sure that you're not misunderstanding what information has been presented to you. And then, react if it's not the response you were looking for, react by using an I statement. I know that sounds a little cliche, but starting a conversation with how you are feeling will elicit much more of a compassionate response. In which the other person will likely want to help solve the disagreement or misunderstanding. So if we say, I'm feeling confused by this or I don't understand. It's much better than saying you said this or you did this. It's just has a better reception. And it's always important to understand, just like another little psychology tool I use is understanding that anger is a secondary emotion. So if you Google an anger iceberg
Okay.
on Google, you will see that anger is a secondary emotion, but usually we are feeling another emotion that is a primary emotion. So are we feeling sad, rejected, confused, which fuels that anger? So we always want to remember that anger is a secondary emotion and that we're usually feeling something else that causes the anger. So if we remember that, sometimes it helps to get to the root of the problem a little easier.
So I'm confused by this versus that's confusing. So
Yes,
it's like not that it doesn't seem like it's coming off attacking, right? Like I'm confused.
exactly.
Can we maybe rephrase this differently? I did not know anger was a secondary emotion.
Yes, it is. And once
Okay.
you remember that, it kind of reframes a lot of things. You can understand where people are coming
Okay.
from a different point of view.
So it's like I'm not just mad, something's causing me to feel angry.
Yeah,
So is
you're
that
probably feeling,
disappointment,
yes,
confusion?
yes.
Wow. Okay.
Hmm. Hmm.
I
Yeah.
love these tips and tricks.
Yes, I was just gonna say a little tricks of the trade.
Right? Oh my goodness. Okay. So we're going through the journey, talked about pregnancy, delivery. One of my big things too is after the journey, right? How is everybody feeling in the headspace with the surrogate mentally? How are you doing? Right? Intended parents. Oh my goodness, you have a little one. How's that process going? Right? So thinking through, going through the process, what does a healthy ending to the surrogacy journey look like? And how would you say that both sides can navigate the post-birth transition?
Absolutely. I'd like to say that a healthy ending begins with a healthy beginning. So this means a couple of things. On the back end, when we are meeting with intended parents and surrogates, we are learning about their expectations and ideals for the surrogacy journey. We are learning about what they envision and what they want in their surrogacy journey. Maybe the intended parents envision an ongoing relationship with the surrogate post-delivery. Maybe the intended parents prefer just kind of a once a year courtesy update. Maybe some intended parents don't want contact post-delivery. Matching has many factors, and post-delivery contact preference is something we take into consideration when matching so that we can aspire to that healthy and happy ending. And that goes in addition to the intended parents, that also pertains to gestational carriers. They also have kind of this ideals and expectations of a surrogacy journey. So asking both sides what they envision post delivery so that everybody's expectations and ideals are met and nobody is kind of let down or hurt after.
I love that. And I think it's important to say, right? So there's no judgment based on what kind of journey you want, right? So if a surrogate tells us like, hey, I kind of don't want that relationship afterwards, that's fine. We'll find intended parents who might feel that same way. There's no
Absolutely.
judgment. I don't think that we can tell you like this is exactly how you need to feel after the delivery, or
Hmm.
this is the type of communication that you want, right? People know what they're comfortable with. So that's
Hmm.
definitely taken into consideration when making these matches, right?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
you would never want to match like a surrogate who's like, I want no communication with those intended parents who might want to have that more lovey-dovey type relationship, right? So
Absolutely.
that's
Yes.
super, super important. And that's talked, about throughout the entire journey. You know,
Hmm.
going into that, how can surrogates and intended parents decide what kind of relationship they want after delivery? And how do you think that should be communicated?
That's a great question. When
Yep.
I meet with surrogates for their mental health evaluation, I encourage them to speak honestly about what they envision post delivery. Most of our surrogates prefer post delivery contact, not because they want to enmesh themselves in the intended parents' lives, but because they have pursued surrogacy because they are caring, loving women who want to be a part of creating happiness and joy for other people. So in turn, they would kind of like to witness the lifelong journey that they helped to create, even if it's, from afar or from a distance, whether that's like receiving a yearly birthday picture or receiving a family Christmas card. So that desire should be communicated during the match meeting when we are determining if the match is a right fit. And the same goes for intended parents. If the intended parents want a relationship that is a little more transactional in nature, then they should be honest during the match meeting for transparency. It's all about that open communication and just sharing how you truly feel so that we make sure as family source consultants that we are creating a good match for a successful outcome.
Agreed. And to piggyback on that, right? It's also in the surrogate's profile and the intended parent's profile, right? So you'll know before you even decide to move forward to that match meeting if you have similar ideals when it does come to those communication preferences.
Hmm.
So I think that is huge, right? You'll meet with the surrogates a lot of times before matching as well and confirm like you thought you wanted this relationship, but maybe actually your communication preference is different, right? So that's something that we need to update and change because it might change your potential matches. So even before match meeting, you at least know what to expect, and then that will be almost like confirmed during that match meeting.
Absolutely. And to just add to that a little bit,
Yeah.
sometimes you're taken by surprise. You would think that you don't want
Mhm.
any contact, but then you meet a surrogate and what you thought was going to be the surrogate, what the surrogate was going to be like or what the journey is going to be like is a pleasant surprise, and you become close to the surrogate and you form an organic and special friendship, and so it might even surprise you after if you thought you didn't want contact, but then you kind of develop this close relationship with your surrogate, and you may want a little more contact than no contact following the delivery.
So I always say it's like a garden, right? You never know.
Absolutely.
You never
Hmm.
know. Some people might have, you know, better gardening tools.
Yeah, that's
And that's
right.
okay,
Yeah.
right? So going here, what would you say there are two or three things every surrogate or intended parent should do at the start of their journey to build a strong relationship?
Yeah, I would say following the match meeting, just really make sure that your your wishes for the journey are met. So did you make sure the communication level and type is what you wanted? Are you more of a texter? Are you more of a FaceTimer? You
Mhm.
know, does that seem like it's going to work for you? How do the people come across, do the intended parents or the surrogate, do they come across as the warm person you were looking for? And communication, did you guys have a successful match meeting? Did it feel like you could talk to these people and work with the other side? How did it feel during the match meeting? So just making sure that those aspects felt right, and that's the start of a strong relationship.
I completely agree. To flip that a little bit, for agencies and professionals, what systems or support structures should be in place to promote that emotional wellness and those strong connections?
Yeah, I mean, at Family Source, we have really strong teams. We have our intake team, we have our match team, we have psych, and then we have our case coordinators. So, we make sure on the back end that we are communicating any and all issues, just to make sure that everything is smooth for the intended parents and the surrogates. So I would say that we help facilitate and promote emotional wellness and strong connections on the back end. And then in turn, we encourage our intended parents and surrogates to have the same structure.
I completely agree. Going through, you've been in practice for so long. I'm so thankful for that because you're wonderful. You're just
Thank you.
fantastic. Going through here, right, with being in practice so long, what would you say is the biggest lesson that you have learned working with surrogates and intended parents over the years?
Yeah, I would say in addition to working with surrogates and intended parents, just people in general, I would say the
Hmm.
biggest lesson I've learned is that everyone just wants to be and feel validated. And so expectations, preferences, worries, acceptance, everyone just wants to be validated. If you think of any emotion that comes along at each step of life or stage in the surrogacy journey, we all want assurance that our thoughts and feelings have been validated, whether that is from an emotional standpoint or a practical standpoint. So when we say, please do not hesitate to reach out, we really mean this. We are here to make sure that you are feeling heard, that your needs, whether that's emotional or practical needs, are being met. And please ask all the questions. We are here to answer all questions and help you feel at ease throughout this entire journey.
1,000%. All the questions, call, text, email, Zoom, WhatsApp, we have it all. So I
Absolutely.
completely agree. If you could offer one piece of advice to someone just starting this journey, so brand new, whether they're a surrogate, an intended parent, or even an agency professional, what would it be?
The best piece of advice I can give is to do research on the journey you're about to embark on. Read the articles, listen to the podcast, join reproductive medicine and intended parent and surrogacy support groups, tap into friends who have gone through IVF or surrogacy, ask questions of your doctor and your agency, and then take it all with a grain of salt. No two journeys will be the same, and every journey is unique. And sometimes things don't go as planned, but that's why it's called a journey. And make sure you have this knowledge and supports in place because it can be an emotional journey, but one that will be so worth it in the end.
I agree. All the research, right? And you'll find one phrase that's used a lot. You'll probably hear me say that a lot is stay cautiously optimistic, right? So, like you
Yes.
said, that this is why it's called a journey, right? And some will be flawless, some may have
Yeah.
hiccups, right? So, having that optimism, but staying a little bit cautious, so that cautious optimism through the process, I think is helpful. And, again, touching back with your specialist, whether you're with your match specialist or you're with a case coordinator or in the legal process, or you've said like, hey, maybe I need kind of like a mental health touchback, right? And
Mhm.
expressing those emotions to your point of contact, I think is huge. So we can make sure that we get you in contact. And like you said, everyone
Yes.
wants to be heard. So we're hearing you and validating those emotions, but also supporting you and giving you the support that you need throughout the journey, whether you're a surrogate, an intended parent, or that professional. So I could not agree more.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Well, I so appreciate you. You are such a wealth of knowledge, Adriana. Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for meeting with me. And I think that this is going to be so helpful to so many people. And I appreciate you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. All right, everybody. Have a wonderful day.
Bye bye.
Bye.